She didn't speak English, but when she shared her last bit of bread, the widow understood. The cold wind of Ganymede cut through the thin metal walls of the abandoned settlement. Mara pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, trying to keep warm. The ice beneath her boots crunched with every step. She had lived on this settlement for nearly a year, ever since her husband had died in a mining accident. The days were long, the nights longer, and the silence felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. The settlement was almost empty. Only her small home, a few hydroponic gardens, and the mining station remained. Supplies were low, and her only companion was the quiet hum of the life support systems. Mara's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shadow moving across the frozen landscape. She squinted, her eyes struggling to make out the figure against the pale light of Ganymede's twin moons. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. A small creature, about her height, moved awkwardly across the ice. Its skin shimmered with faint patterns that glowed softly, almost like the surface of a bubble reflecting light. It carried something in its hands, a small loaf of bread, wrapped in a thin cloth. Her first instinct was fear. Mara gripped the metal pipe she kept by the door for protection. She had faced dangers before, rogue miners, ice storms, and equipment failures, but she had never seen anything like this. The figure stopped a few meters away, tilting its head curiously. Its eyes were large and round, glowing faintly in the dark. It made a soft sound, almost like a whisper, but not human. Mara took a step back. What are you?" she asked, her voice shaking. The creature tilted its head again and made the same soft sound. It raised the loaf of bread slightly as if offering it to her. Mara hesitated. Hunger gnawed at her, but fear held her in place. She could see that the bread was small, just enough for one person, maybe two. It looked like it had been carried for a long journey. The creature made another sound, then pointed to itself, and then to the bread. Mara realized it was trying to communicate. But she had no idea what language it spoke. She lowered the pipe slightly. I don't understand you," she said softly. The creature's glowing patterns shifted, almost like waves moving across its skin. It stepped closer, holding out the bread. Its gesture was simple, honest, and patient. Mara looked around. There was no one else here, no one to help her. And yet, she felt something in the creature's actions that she recognized. Hunger. Loneliness. The same feeling she had carried since her husband had died. She slowly took a step forward and reached out. The creature hesitated for a moment, then relaxed. Mara carefully took the bread. It was warm in her hands. She broke off a small piece and ate it. The creature watched her silently, its large eyes following every bite. Mara realized it wasn't dangerous. It wasn't here to hurt her. It was just lost, like her. She put the remaining bread on the table inside her small home. "You can stay," she said quietly, surprising herself. The creature tilted its head, and for the first time it seemed to smile, though not in a human way. Its glowing patterns pulsed softly. Mara could feel the warmth of its presence in the cold room. For hours they sat in silence. Mara tried to speak to it, asking questions, but no words worked. The creature responded with gestures and small sounds, tilting its head, pointing at things, and moving its hands in slow, deliberate motions. Mara began to notice a pattern. When it pointed to the hydroponic garden, it wanted water. When it gestured toward the small heater, it seemed to be cold. They didn't need words. Their actions communicated enough for the moment. Days passed, and Mara slowly began to trust the creature. She learned to understand its small gestures, the way it pointed to food, the way it mimicked her movements, even the way its glowing patterns changed when it was happy or scared. Mara started calling it Lyra, a name she chose for its soft musical sound. Lyra responded to the name, tilting its head and letting its glow brighten for a moment. Despite the growing trust, Mara couldn't shake her worry. The settlement was dangerous. Supplies were running low, and they were not alone in the frozen wilderness. Ganymede was home to scavengers, desperate humans, and creatures from other colonies who would take anything they could find. She knew they had to be careful. Yet, in her heart, she felt a strange sense of hope. Lyra was different from anyone she had ever met. It didn't care about her wealth, her equipment, or her past. It cared only about survival, and in that they were alike. One night, Mara cooked a small meal for them both. She didn't know if Lyra could eat human food, but it accepted the food with delicate gestures, nibbling at it carefully. Mara watched it eat, marveling at the tiny, precise movements. She felt a pang of warmth in her chest. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. As the weeks passed, Mara and Lyra settled into a quiet rhythm. Mara showed Lyra the hydroponic garden, how to water the plants, and how to adjust the lights. Lyra responded with gestures of gratitude, sometimes creating patterns in the air with its glowing skin. Mara found herself smiling more often, talking to Lyra even though it could not reply with words. She began to realize that understanding did not always need language. A shared moment, a shared gesture, a shared piece of bread, sometimes that was enough. One morning, Mara awoke to find Lyra standing at the window, glowing softly. It pointed to the horizon, where the ice fields stretched endlessly. Mara understood that Lyra wanted to explore. Fear tugged at her chest, but she nodded. They had survived together this long. Perhaps together they could survive even more. Before they left the safety of the settlement, Mara packed a small bag of supplies. Lyra watched her, its glow pulsing with anticipation. Mara reached out and placed her hand on Lyra's. Its hand was cool, almost delicate, but strong enough to hold hers. In that simple touch, they communicated trust, courage, and an unspoken promise they would face the unknown together. As they stepped out into the icy landscape, Mara felt the wind biting at her face, the crunch of ice under her boots, and the vast emptiness stretching before them. Yet she did not feel fear as strongly as before. She had Lyra with her, and somehow that made the cold, harsh world feel a little warmer, a little less lonely. Lyra paused, looking back at the settlement. Its glow dimmed slightly, a sign of longing. Mara smiled softly. "We will return," she said, though she wasn't sure if Lyra understood the words. Lyra responded with a small gesture, mimicking her smile, and together they moved forward into the unknown. The journey would be dangerous. The world beyond the settlement was full of threats, scavengers, storms, and creatures that neither of them could predict. But Mara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. And for the first time since her husband had died, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a place where they both belonged. In that moment, Mara realized the truth that would guide her through the days ahead. Words were not always necessary to understand someone. Sometimes a simple act of kindness, a shared piece of bread, a helping hand, a gesture of trust, was enough to bridge even the greatest divide. And so, Mara and Lyra began their journey across the icy expanse of Ganymede, two unlikely companions bound by survival, compassion, and the unspoken language of understanding. The wind on Ganymede had grown colder, sharper, slicing through even the thickest layers of clothing. Mara and Lyra had traveled for several days from the abandoned settlement, moving across the icy plains and jagged ridges that stretched endlessly beneath the twin moons. The landscape was beautiful in a strange, frozen way, but it was also lonely and dangerous. Mara's boots left deep prints in the ice, and Lyra followed, its delicate steps leaving faint glowing marks behind. At first, Mara had worried that Lyra might be too fragile for such a journey. Its small body seemed light and fragile compared to the harsh world around them. But each day she saw its resilience. Lyra was clever, noticing hidden cracks in the ice, avoiding unstable ridges, and finding small patches where food could be gathered or stored. Mara realized that despite its appearance, Lyra was strong in ways that humans often were not. It was the kind of strength that came from survival and determination, not muscles. One evening, as they set up camp in the shadow of a jagged ice formation, Mara noticed something unusual. Lyra was holding its hands together, pointing at her gently, then at the small bag of supplies she carried. She knelt down, taking out a piece of dried meat and offering it to Lyra. The creature sniffed it carefully, then shook its head, gesturing toward the small loaf of bread she had saved from the settlement. Mara paused. She understood immediately. Lyra wasn't hungry for human food. It wanted something more meaningful, something it could share. She took the loaf from her bag and broke off a tiny piece, placing it carefully in Lyra's hands. Lyra's glowing pattern shimmered brighter, almost like laughter, and it mimicked Mara's gesture by breaking the bread in half and offering her piece back. Mara took it with a small smile. They ate together, each bite a silent acknowledgement of trust and understanding. It was a simple act, but it carried weight. Mara had not shared anything with anyone for a long time, not even words or stories. Now, in the cold and loneliness of Ganymede, she shared her last bread with Lyra, and in return, Lyra shared its silent companionship. After their small meal, Mara spoke softly, even though she knew Lyra could not understand her words. "I never thought I would meet anyone like you. Not here. Not in this frozen place." Lyra tilted its head, glowing faintly in response. Its gestures were careful and deliberate, almost as if it were trying to say, "Neither did I." The next morning, the icy plains revealed the challenges ahead. Ganymede was unforgiving, and their supplies were running low. Mara taught Lyra how to dig small patches in the frozen ground to find edible roots, how to melt ice for water, and how to recognize safe shelter in the jagged terrain. Lyra learned quickly, using its unique abilities to sense subtle changes in the ice and weather. Mara had never seen a creature adapt so fast to a human way of life, and yet it never lost its own alien qualities. As they traveled, Mara found herself talking aloud, even though she was unsure Lyra could understand. She spoke of her husband, of the lonely days on the settlement, of the small joys she had once known. Sometimes Lyra responded with gestures, pointing, mimicking, glowing in patterns that made Mara laugh. It was a strange, wordless conversation, but it was conversation nonetheless. One evening, as they rested near a ridge overlooking a frozen valley, Lyra made a new gesture. It pointed at Mara, then at the piece of bread, then at the valley below. Mara studied its movements. Slowly she understood. Lyra was asking her to share the last bread, not just with it, but with the valley, to leave some for any traveler or creature they might meet. Mara hesitated. The bread was all they had left, but she looked at Lyra's glowing eyes and felt a warmth in her chest. Carefully, Mara broke the bread into smaller pieces, scattering them across the icy plain. Lyra mimicked her, letting the small, glowing fragments of its presence touch each piece. They watched silently as the wind carried the crumbs, a small act of kindness in a harsh and lonely world. Mara felt lighter somehow, as if letting go of the bread had also eased some of the loneliness she carried. Lyra pulsed gently, its glow soft and calm, almost like a smile. Their journey continued, and the bond between Mara and Lyra grew stronger. Mara began to notice subtle signs of emotion in Lyra's gestures: happiness when they found food, concern when she stumbled, pride when she learned something new. It was clear that Lyra felt connected to her, not just as a companion, but as a friend. Mara, in turn, felt a protective instinct she had not experienced since her husband's death. She realized that companionship did not need words. It needed trust, understanding, and sometimes simple acts of generosity. One day, as they climbed a particularly steep ridge, Mara slipped on the ice. She fell, scraping her arm, and the cold air bit at her skin. Lyra rushed to her side, its glowing hands hovering close, as if sensing her pain. Mara looked into its large eyes and felt a strange comfort. Lyra took a small piece of bread from her pack and pressed it to her lips. She ate, and slowly the warmth returned to her body. She realized then that Lyra's gestures were not only communication, they were a way of caring. As they reached the top of the ridge, the sun rose over the icy expanse, casting pale light across the frozen world. Mara looked out at the valley below, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. This place was beautiful, yes, but it was also vast and dangerous. And yet, she no longer felt completely alone. Lyra stood beside her, glowing softly, its presence a reassurance in the harsh cold. That night, as they settled in a small cave to sleep, Mara reflected on the journey so far. She thought about the first time she had met Lyra, about the fear and uncertainty that had filled her heart. Now, she felt something new. Hope. Hope that they could survive this world together. Hope that they could find a place where they belonged. And hope that kindness, simple, unspoken kindness, could be a bridge across even the greatest divides. Lyra seemed to sense her thoughts. It glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the small fire Mara had made. It made a series of soft sounds, almost musical, and Mara felt a strange joy in listening. She reached out, touching its hand gently. Lyra responded with a small gesture, pressing her hand lightly in return. In that moment, Mara understood something fundamental. Words were not the only way to communicate. Actions, gestures, and shared experiences could speak just as loudly, if not louder. The following days brought new challenges. They encountered a frozen river that had cracked in several places, forcing them to find a way across. Mara noticed Lyra using its glowing patterns to sense the safest route, lighting a path that Mara could follow. They moved slowly and carefully, trusting each other completely. Mara realized that survival in this world required more than skill. It required trust, courage, and the willingness to accept help from others, even those who were different. As they continued, Mara thought about the wider universe. She had always believed humans were alone in the stars, struggling against harsh environments and isolation. But Lyra had shown her that companionship could come from unexpected places. That even beings who did not speak her language, who did not understand her culture or her past, could become friends, allies, and even family. One evening, as they gazed at the stars shimmering above the icy plains, Mara broke a small piece of bread and handed it to Lyra. Lyra took it carefully, then pressed it to her own glowing chest, a gesture Mara interpreted as gratitude. Then Lyra turned and scattered some of the crumbs into the air. Mara laughed softly, understanding the meaning immediately. Lyra was sharing her gift just as they had shared the valley's bread earlier. Generosity, kindness, and trust. These were universal, she realized. They transcended language, species, and worlds. By the end of Part 2, Mara and Lyra had become more than companions. They were partners in survival, friends in a harsh and lonely world, and examples of the power of empathy and understanding. The vast, icy plains of Ganymede no longer felt as cold or as empty. With each shared piece of bread, each gentle gesture, and each silent moment of understanding, Mara realized that connection was possible in even the most unlikely circumstances. And as they moved forward, side by side, she knew that whatever challenges awaited them beyond the horizon, they would face them together. Not as human and alien, but as two beings who understood each other without words. The icy plains of Ganymede stretched endlessly, shimmering under the twin moons. Mara and Lyra moved carefully side by side, their footprints tracing a fragile path through the frozen wilderness. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the faint scent of minerals from beneath the ice. For days their journey had been quiet, filled only with the soft crunch of ice beneath their boots and the faint glow of Lyra's skin as it pulsed with subtle patterns. Yet Mara sensed unease in the air. It was a feeling she had grown accustomed to during her time alone on the settlement, a sense that danger could be near, waiting in the shadows. Lyra seemed to sense it too. Its glow dimmed slightly, its gestures becoming more deliberate, cautious. Mara trusted the creature's instincts. In the wilds of Ganymede, they were both vulnerable. As they crossed a wide valley, Mara noticed movement at the edge of her vision. Shadows flickered against the icy ridges. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Lyra stopped immediately, tilting its head, its glow flickering rapidly. Mara followed its gaze and saw them. 3 scavengers moving across the ice dressed in ragged spacesuits. They were human, Mara realized, but their eyes were cold and their intentions clear. "They're after our supplies," she whispered, gripping her walking stick tightly. Lyra responded with a soft sound, a high-pitched note that Mara had learned meant caution. They were outnumbered, unarmed except for what they carried, but Mara's mind raced. She had survived storms, hunger, and loneliness. She could survive this, too. The scavengers advanced slowly, testing the distance, their eyes fixed on the small pack of supplies Mara carried. Mara signaled to Lyra, pointing to the ridge above. Lyra's glow pulsed as if acknowledging the plan. Mara led the way, carefully moving toward a narrow pass between icy cliffs, hoping to use the terrain to their advantage. When the scavengers noticed them moving, they accelerated. One of them shouted, though the words were muffled by the suits. Mara could see the glint of weapons in their hands. The air became tense, the valley echoing with the crunch of boots on ice. Mara's heart pounded, but she kept her face steady. She couldn't show fear, not now. Lyra stepped forward, glowing brightly. Mara watched as it lifted its hands, moving in patterns that seemed almost like a dance. Suddenly, the air changed. Mara realized that Lyra was releasing a subtle pheromone, one that disoriented the scavengers. They slowed, blinking, confused. Mara felt a surge of relief. Lyra's abilities were incredible, something no human could do alone. She took the opportunity to act. Using the icy cliffs as cover, Mara led Lyra in a zigzag path, forcing the scavengers to follow the narrow, dangerous route. One misstep could send them tumbling into the frozen chasm below. Mara's mind raced as she considered their next move. She needed a way to end the confrontation without violence. She couldn't fight them all. Lyra couldn't fight in human terms either. They had to be clever. Mara noticed a patch of ice above the path, thin and fragile. She pointed to it, then back at the scavengers, mimicking the motion of falling. Lyra understood immediately. Together they moved carefully, positioning themselves so the scavengers would walk across the weak ice. The scavengers, confused by Lyra's glowing and Mara's gestures, didn't notice the danger. With a loud crack, the ice beneath one of the scavengers gave way. He fell, sliding down the slope and landing safely but stunned. The other two paused, glancing at Mara and Lyra. Mara didn't attack. She simply pointed to the path ahead and back, signaling that they should leave. Lyra emitted another disorienting pulse, and the scavengers, realizing they were outsmarted, retreated cautiously, keeping their distance. Mara let out a deep breath, her hands shaking. "We're okay," she whispered. Lyra tilted its head, glowing softly, almost like it was laughing. Mara couldn't help but smile. Together they had faced danger and survived, relying not on brute strength but on cleverness, trust, and understanding. As they continued their journey, Mara felt a new sense of confidence. She had faced the isolation of the settlement, the loneliness of the ice, and now the threat of human greed. Each challenge had taught her something about herself and about Lyra. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the willingness to move forward despite it. Lyra seemed to sense Mara's thoughts. Its glowing patterns shifted in a rhythmic pulse, and Mara felt a warmth spreading through her chest. She had never imagined forming such a bond with an alien, a being so different from herself. And yet, here they were, surviving together in one of the harshest environments in the solar system. That night, they found shelter in a small cavern, protected from the icy wind. Mara unpacked the remaining supplies, and they shared a simple meal. She broke the last loaf of bread in half, offering one piece to Lyra. The creature accepted it carefully, pressing it to its chest in a gesture of gratitude. Mara realized that this small act, this simple sharing, was as important as any strategy or plan. It was the foundation of their bond. As they settled down, Mara spoke softly, even though Lyra could not understand the words. "We did it," she said. "We survived today, and we'll survive tomorrow too. Together." Lyra responded with a gentle glow, pulsing in rhythm with Mara's heartbeat. It pressed its hand lightly to hers, a gesture that needed no translation. Mara felt a deep sense of comfort. She had learned something essential. Understanding and trust could cross any barrier, even between species. The next morning they continued their journey, the threat of scavengers still lingering in Mara's mind. She knew they could return at any time. But the ice was beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. They moved slowly, carefully, watching for weak spots in the frozen ground and signs of other travelers. Mara noticed small tracks in the ice, perhaps animals, perhaps other humans. But Lyra seemed unconcerned. Its instincts guided them safely past each obstacle. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the icy plains, Mara found herself reflecting on their journey. She had been alone for so long, lost in grief and fear. Now she had a companion who understood her in ways words never could. Lyra's gestures, its glowing patterns, its careful attention to her, had taught her a profound lesson. Connection was not only about language or culture. It was about empathy, courage, and small acts of kindness. By midday, they reached a frozen ridge overlooking a deep valley. Mara paused, taking in the view. The valley stretched for miles, glittering with ice and snow, a vast and unbroken wilderness. It was dangerous, yes, but also breathtaking. Mara felt a mixture of awe and fear. Lyra moved beside her, glowing softly, and she realized that she no longer felt completely alone. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Suddenly, Lyra froze, its glow flickering rapidly. Mara followed its gaze and saw a movement below, a group of scavengers, smaller this time, crossing the valley. They had found another route. Mara's heart sank. They were still not safe, but instead of panic, she felt determination. She had faced fear before, and she knew they could survive this too. Mara whispered to Lyra, pointing to a narrow path along the ridge that overlooked the valley. Lyra understood immediately, moving ahead to scout. Using its abilities, it signaled to Mara when the path was safe and where the ice was weak. Mara followed carefully, trusting Lyra completely. The scavengers below saw them but could not follow. Mara realized that the clever use of terrain and Lyra's unique abilities gave them an advantage they could not have had alone. By evening, they had safely crossed the valley. Mara felt a surge of pride. They had faced not just nature but human threats and had survived through teamwork, cleverness, and understanding. Lyra's glowing patterns pulsed gently as if acknowledging the victory. Mara reached out, taking its hand, and pressed it to her chest. It responded in kind. As night fell, Mara realized how much they had both changed. The fear and isolation she had carried for so long had been replaced, slowly, with trust and hope. Lyra had shown her that courage could come in many forms, through action, through empathy, and through simple gestures of kindness. And she had shown Lyra that humans were capable of patience, understanding, and friendship. Mara smiled softly, looking at the glowing creature beside her. Together, they had faced threats from the outside world and emerged stronger. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, storms, hunger, perhaps even more scavengers, but she no longer felt helpless. She had Lyra, and Lyra had her. Together they were more than survivors. They were a team, bound not by words, but by trust, courage, and compassion. As they settled for the night, Mara thought about the future. The vast expanse of Ganymede was still full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities. And with Lyra by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, Mara felt truly alive, and truly understood the icy winds of Ganymede were calmer than before, but the landscape remained harsh and unforgiving. Mara and Lyra had traveled far from the abandoned settlement, crossing frozen plains and jagged ridges, facing threats from both nature and humans. Yet, despite the dangers, a quiet sense of peace had begun to grow between them. Their journey had taught Mara more about courage, empathy, and companionship than she had ever learned in all her years on the settlement. That morning, Mara awoke to find Lyra standing at the edge of a small plateau. Its glowing patterns pulsed softly, casting light across the ice. Mara stepped forward and noticed that Lyra was looking at the valley below, a deep expanse of glittering ice stretching for miles. She understood immediately. Lyra wanted to move forward, to explore the unknown together. Mara smiled. "All right," she whispered, "let's see what's out there." They descended carefully, using the skills they had learned over weeks of travel. Mara watched Lyra closely. The creature was nimble, moving across the ice with ease, its glowing patterns reflecting the light of the twin moons. It paused often, looking back at Mara to ensure she was following. Mara realized that Lyra's guidance was not only practical, but also deeply caring. This silent understanding, this mutual trust, had become their unspoken language. As they entered a narrow canyon, Mara noticed something unusual. The walls of ice shimmered with faint cracks, and strange patterns glowed faintly beneath the surface. Lyra approached them with caution, its fingers tracing the glowing lines. Mara bent down, examining the ice. It was not natural. Someone or something had carved these channels, perhaps for water or resources. Mara felt a spark of curiosity mixed with caution. Whoever had done this was likely intelligent and possibly dangerous. Suddenly, a distant sound echoed through the canyon. Metal scraping against ice. A low hum of machinery. Mara froze, gripping her walking stick tightly. Lyra's glow intensified, its patterns flashing urgently. Mara knew they were not alone. She motioned for Lyra to follow her into a small crevice along the canyon wall. They crouched together, hidden from view, listening. A group of humans appeared, armed with tools and small weapons, searching the area. Mara recognized the look in their eyes, the same greed and desperation she had seen before. They were scavengers, searching for anything they could take. Mara felt a surge of protectiveness. They had come too far to let strangers destroy what little they had. Lyra stepped forward slightly, glowing brightly. Mara understood immediately. It was ready to help, using its abilities if necessary. She nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. Together they would face this threat, not with violence, but with cleverness and teamwork, as they had before. The scavengers moved closer, unaware of the hidden pair. Mara noticed a loose section of ice above them. She whispered to Lyra, pointing to it, and the creature's glow pulsed in understanding. Mara took a deep breath. Using a stick, she carefully tapped the ice. The section cracked, sending a small shower of frost and snow onto the scavengers. They stumbled, startled, their focus broken. Lyra added its own skill, releasing a faint pheromone that caused disorientation. The scavengers paused, looking around in confusion, unsure of what was happening. Mara seized the opportunity. She motioned for Lyra to move forward along the canyon, and together they led the scavengers toward a narrow part of the canyon where the ice floor was thin. One misstep, and the ground could give way. Mara and Lyra positioned themselves carefully, using hand signals and glowing patterns to communicate silently. The scavengers, panicked and distracted, followed them exactly as planned. A loud crack echoed through the canyon as one of the scavengers fell through the thin ice, sliding safely into a lower crevice, but unable to continue the chase. The remaining scavengers, frightened and unsure, retreated quickly, disappearing into the distance. Mara exhaled, her hands shaking slightly. Lyra's glow dimmed, relaxing as the danger passed. Mara reached out, placing her hand gently on Lyra's. It responded with a soft pulse, a gesture of gratitude and reassurance. After the threat had passed, Mara and Lyra paused to rest. Mara offered Lyra a small piece of bread, and the creature accepted it with care, pressing it against its glowing chest. Mara smiled. Each shared moment, each gesture of kindness, had strengthened the bond between them. They had faced dangers, both natural and human, and emerged stronger because of their trust in one another. As they continued their journey, the landscape began to change. The ice fields gave way to jagged cliffs and hidden crevices, and patches of Ganymede's strange vegetation appeared, plants adapted to the extreme cold, glowing faintly in the dim light. Mara marveled at the beauty, feeling a sense of wonder she had not experienced in years. Lyra moved with grace, pointing out safe paths and hidden resources. Mara realized that she had come to depend on Lyra's abilities as much as Lyra depended on her guidance and care. One evening, as the twin moons rose high above the horizon, Mara and Lyra found a sheltered canyon that seemed perfect for camping. Mara set up a small fire, careful not to melt the fragile ice around them. They shared their simple meal, breaking bread and chewing slowly, savoring the warmth and the quiet companionship. Mara looked at Lyra, glowing softly in the moonlight, and felt a deep sense of connection. Words were not necessary. They never had been. "You've taught me so much," Mara said softly. "Not just about survival, about trust, courage, and kindness." Lyra's glow pulsed gently, and it made a series of soft sounds, musical and calming. Mara smiled. "I think I understand you now, even if I can't speak your language. And maybe you understand me too." Lyra pressed its hand to Mara's chest, glowing warmly, and Mara felt a sense of peace she had not known since her husband's death. The following days brought new discoveries. They found an abandoned research outpost, long forgotten beneath layers of ice. Inside, they uncovered tools, supplies, and data about Ganymede's environment. Mara realized that this outpost could sustain them, giving them food, warmth, and protection. Lyra examined the equipment, glowing patterns shifting as it studied the technology. Together, they restored some of the basic systems, creating a small, safe haven in the icy wilderness. Mara began teaching Lyra simple human traditions: how to tend to the small garden, how to cook basic meals, how to mark days with small rituals. Lyra responded with its own unique gestures, showing Mara the ways of its species, how it sensed the environment, how it communicated through patterns and pheromones. The exchange of knowledge was slow, careful, but it created a bridge between two worlds. Mara felt a profound sense of wonder. Connection could exist even without words, even across the greatest divides. Word of their presence eventually reached nearby colonies. Humans came, curious and cautious, but Mara and Lyra welcomed them with gestures of peace. Lyra's abilities impressed them, and Mara's courage and resourcefulness earned their respect. Slowly, a small community began to form around the outpost, drawn not by fear or greed, but by the example of trust and kindness set by the human and the alien. One evening, as Mara and Lyra stood outside watching the twin moons reflect on the icy plains, Mara felt a sense of completion. Their journey had been dangerous, lonely, and uncertain, but it had also been filled with growth, understanding, and friendship. Lyra pressed its hand to hers, glowing softly, and Mara smiled. "Words aren't always needed," she whispered. "Sometimes a shared piece of bread, a helping hand, or a simple gesture can say everything." Lyra pulsed gently as if agreeing. Together, they watched the moons rise, thinking of the journey behind them and the future ahead. The story of Mara and Lyra became known in nearby colonies. A human and an alien who had faced isolation, hunger, and danger, yet had survived through empathy, courage, and understanding. Their bond showed that connection was universal, that kindness could bridge worlds, and that even in the harshest environments, hope could flourish. And as they turned toward the horizon, ready to face new challenges together, Mara realized the greatest lesson of all: understanding beyond words was the truest form of communication. In sharing, protecting, and trusting one another, they had found a home, not just on Ganymede, but in each other's presence. With Lyra by her side, Mara knew she was no longer alone, and in that realization she found a peace and strength that would carry them through whatever lay ahead in the frozen, beautiful, and dangerous world they now called home.